The cold vacuum of space held no mercy for the dying human fleet hiding in the Kepler asteroid belt. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his converted mining vessel, watching the stars through a cracked viewport that his crew had patched. With scrap metal and prayers, the ship groaned around him like an old man's bones, its hull scarred by energy burns from their last desperate escape 3 months ago. Behind him, the communications officer called out in a tired voice that had lost all hope weeks earlier. "Sir, we're getting reports from the outer markers. The Kethver scouts are getting closer. Maybe 2 days before they find us." Jake closed his eyes and felt the weight of 10,000 human lives pressing down on his shoulders. 10,000. Souls scattered across a dozen broken ships, hiding in the cold darkness between asteroids, like frightened children playing hide and seek with death itself. He thought about Earth, about the blue skies he would never see again, about the gardens his grandmother had tended before the aliens turned his home world into a ball of radioactive glass. The Kethvar had come from the deep, void between stars like a plague of metal locusts. Their ships moved through solid rock as easily as fish swimming through water. Their weapons tore holes in space itself, creating wounds in reality that swallowed human vessels whole. When humanity tried to fight back with nuclear missiles and plasma cannons, the alien shields turned their most powerful attacks into harmless light shows. Jake walked through the narrow corridors of his ship, past families huddled in converted cargo bays, past children who had never seen a real planet, past engineers who worked 18-hour shifts to keep their failing life support systems running for one more day. The air smelled of recycled sweat and fear, of hope slowly dying in the darkness. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Park bent over a table covered with strange alien metal fragments. She had been the head of quantum physics at Earth's finest university before the war. Now she spent her days trying to understand technology that seemed to mock every law of science she had ever learned. Her dark hair had turned gray in the 3 years since the invasion began, and her hands shook from too much coffee and too little sleep. "Any progress, Doc?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer from the defeated look in her eyes. Lisa held up a piece of Kethver hull plating that shimmered with an inner light. That hurt to look at directly. "It's impossible, Jake. This metal shouldn't exist. It phases in and out of our reality, like it's choosing which physical laws to obey. Every time I think I understand how it works, it does something that breaks my instruments and makes me question everything I thought I knew about the universe." Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer Bobby Chun cursed at a dying power core that had been pushed far beyond its design limits. Bobby had spent 40 years fixing things that other people said couldn't be fixed, but the Kethver technology laughed at human engineering like a symphony laughs at a child banging on pots and pans. He had converted mining lasers into weapons, upgraded cargo haulers into warships, and turned passenger liners into fortress ships. But he knew in his heart that all his clever modifications were useless against an enemy that could walk through walls and bend space around their fingers. The refugee ships floated in the asteroid field like broken toys scattered by a giant child. The passenger liner New Hope carried 3,000 civilians in spaces meant for 300. The cargo vessel Defiant had been turned into a flying farm, its holds filled with hydroponic gardens that barely produced enough food to keep everyone alive. The mining ship Persistence served as their main weapon platform, its industrial equipment converted into the most powerful guns that human technology could build. But Jake knew that all their preparations were just ways of keeping busy while they waited to die. The Kethver had destroyed every human colony, every space station, every ship that tried to fight them. Earth's mighty defense fleets had lasted less than 6 months against the alien invasion. The proud colonies of Alpha Centauri and Wolf 359 had fallen in weeks. Now only this small group of survivors remained, playing a hopeless game of cat and mouse in the cold void. Admiral Kate Sullivan, the highest-ranking officer who had escaped Earth's destruction, called a meeting of all ship captains in the New Hope's main assembly hall. The room was packed with tired faces and hollow eyes, with people who had lost everything but still somehow found the strength to keep fighting another day. Kate stood at the front of the room, her uniform clean but patched, her voice steady despite the hopelessness of their situation. Long-range sensors had detected a major Kethver fleet moving toward our position, she announced, her words falling like stones into still water. 72 ships, including 3 of their heavy dreadnoughts. They'll reach the outer edge of our hiding zone in approximately 72 hours. The room fell silent, except for the quiet humming of life support systems and the distant sound of a baby crying somewhere in the back. Everyone knew what those numbers meant. 3 Kethver. Dreadnoughts could destroy their entire fleet without breaking formation. The aliens wouldn't even need to slow down. Jake stood up from his seat, looking around at the faces of people who had followed him across half the galaxy, who had trusted him to keep them safe when the rest of the universe had turned against humanity. What are our options, Admiral? Kate's smile was sad and small. We can run again, but our ships are falling apart and we're almost out of fuel. We can try to fight, but we all know how that will end. Or, she paused, looking out at the sea of desperate faces. Or we can make our last stand here and make sure that when the universe forgets about humanity, it at least remembers that we didn't go quietly. As the meeting broke up and the captains returned to their ships, Jake found himself standing alone at a viewport, watching the cold stars wheel slowly overhead. Somewhere out there, death was coming for them in ships that could tear holes in reality itself. But as he watched the stars, Jake felt something strange stirring in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more dangerous. The kind of anger that burned cold and clean, the kind of determination that had carried humanity from caves to the stars in the first place. The Kethver thought they had won. They thought humanity was finished, broken, ready to die quietly in the dark. But they had never met a species that refused to accept defeat, even when defeat was the only logical option. They had never faced an enemy that grew more dangerous as it became more desperate. Jake smiled grimly at his reflection in the viewport. The aliens were about to learn something important about humanity. They were about to discover what happened when you cornered the wrong species. The Kethver fleet moved through space like a school of metal sharks, their dark ships cutting through the void with deadly purpose. On her instruments, Dr. Lisa Park watched the enemy formation grow larger with each passing hour, knowing that each blip on her screen represented enough firepower to glass a planet. She had 58 hours left to solve a puzzle that had defeated the greatest minds of human science. 58 hours to find a miracle in the wreckage of alien technology that seemed to operate by rules that mocked physics itself. In her cramped laboratory aboard the research vessel Horizon, Lisa stared at the Kethvar power core they had salvaged from a damaged enemy scout ship 6 months ago. The device hummed with energy that her instruments could barely detect, let alone measure. It was no bigger than her fist, yet it produced more power than a fusion reactor 10 times its size. The metal casing shifted and flowed like liquid mercury, and sometimes she could swear she saw patterns moving beneath its surface that reminded her of neural pathways or flowing rivers. Her colleague, Dr. Ray Johnson, worked at the station next to hers, his graying beard stained with coffee and his eyes red from too many sleepless nights. Ray had been her mentor back on Earth, the man who had taught her that the universe followed rules that could be understood and predicted. Now he spent his days watching those rules crumble like sand castles before the tide of Kethvar technology. It's not possible, Lisa, Ray muttered for the 100th time, poking at a fragment of alien hull metal with an electron probe. This stuff phases in and out of our reality, But there's no energy signature, no quantum field disruption, nothing that explains how it works. It's like the universe just decides to let it break the rules. Lisa rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the data streaming across her screens. Quantum fluctuation readings that spiked and dived like a heart monitor attached to a dying patient. Energy patterns that followed no known mathematical progression. Molecular structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. But there, buried in the chaos of impossible readings, she began to see something that made her hands shake with excitement and terror. "Ray, look at this," she whispered, her voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes with a breakthrough. "That changes everything. The quantum fluctuations aren't random. They're following a pattern, but not in normal spacetime. They're operating in something deeper." She pulled up her analysis of the power core's emission spectrum, overlaying it with quantum field equations that she had been working on for months. The math was ugly and complicated, full of variables that shouldn't exist and constants that changed when she wasn't looking directly at them. But buried in the equations, she began to see the outline of something vast and fundamental. What if they're not breaking the laws of physics? Lisa said, her voice growing stronger as the pieces began to fit together in her mind. What if they're accessing something that exists underneath physics itself? Something more fundamental than matter and energy? Ray looked up from his instruments with the expression of a man watching his student climb out onto a very dangerous intellectual limb. "That's impossible, Lisa. There is nothing more fundamental than quantum mechanics. We've mapped reality down to the smallest possible level." But Lisa was already running calculations, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she chased the mathematical ghost that danced at the edge of her understanding. She called it quantum substrate, the theoretical foundation layer that existed beneath the reality that humans could perceive and measure. If her math was right, the Kethver had evolved the ability to see and manipulate this deeper level of existence, giving them what appeared to be godlike control over the physical universe. "They can see the bones of reality itself," Lisa whispered, staring at her equations with a mixture of wonder and despair. "That's why their technology looks impossible to us. They're not working with matter and energy. They're manipulating the substrate that creates matter and energy." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Humanity had spent centuries mapping the universe layer by layer, from classical physics down through quantum mechanics to the theoretical foundations of existence itself. But they had never been able to directly access those deepest levels because human brains had evolved to perceive only the surface reality of matter and energy. The Kethver had biological advantages that humans could never match. Neural structures that had developed over millions of years to interface directly with quantum. Substrate. Ray was shaking his head, his face pale as he began to understand what Lisa was suggesting. "Even if you're right, even if this quantum substrate exists, we can't access it. Our brains aren't built for it. We might as well try to see ultraviolet light with our naked eyes or hear radio waves with our ears." Lisa stared at the alien power core, watching the patterns flow beneath its surface like thoughts made visible. An idea began to form in her mind, an idea so dangerous and desperate that it made her stomach turn with fear. But with less than 2 days before the Kethver fleet arrived, desperation was the only luxury they could afford. "What if we could modify human neural structure?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we could use their own technology to enhance a human brain, give someone the ability to perceive quantum substrate directly?" The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. Ray stared at her with the look of a man watching someone propose to jump off a cliff without a parachute. "Lisa, that would be like performing brain surgery with a chainsaw while riding a roller coaster in the dark," Ray said slowly. "We don't understand Kethver neural technology at all." We don't know how their brains work or how they interface with their machines. Trying to graft their technology onto a human nervous system would probably kill the subject instantly. But Lisa was already pulling up medical scans of Kethfer neural tissue, comparing them to human brain structure. The alien nervous system was completely different from anything that had evolved on Earth, with crystalline structures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. But there, at the quantum level, she could see connection points where the two types of neural tissue might be able to interface. "It would have to be someone volunteer," she said, her voice growing steadier as she committed to the impossible. "Plan. Someone willing to risk death or insanity for a chance to give humanity a fighting chance. And the modifications would have to be extensive. We'd be essentially creating a human Kethver hybrid brain." The door to the laboratory slid open, and Captain Jake Morrison stepped inside, his face grim with the weight of command decisions that offered only degrees of disaster. He looked at the two scientists, seeing something in their expressions that made him straighten with the first hint of hope he had felt in months. "Doc, please tell me you've found something," Jake said, his voice carrying the desperate prayer of a man watching his species slide toward extinction. "Because I just got word from our scouts. The Kethver fleet is accelerating. They'll be here in 48 hours instead of 72. Lisa looked at Jake, seeing in his eyes the same desperate determination that had carried humanity from the caves to the stars. She thought about the 10,000 survivors scattered through the asteroid field, about the children who would never grow up to see humanity reclaim the galaxy, about the dreams and hopes of an entire species balanced on the edge of forever. "Jake, I think I know how their technology works," she said slowly. "But using that knowledge would require an experimental procedure that would probably kill whoever volunteers for it. Even if it works, the subject might not survive long enough to make a difference." Jake's smile was sharp and cold, the expression of a man who had run out of safe options and found that he didn't mind the dangerous ones. "Doc, if we don't try something impossible in the next 2 days, we're all going to die anyway." "What do you need?" Lisa felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders as she began to explain her theory about quantum substrate and the modifications that would be necessary to access it. She was proposing to transform a human being into something that had never existed before, to create a bridge between two completely different forms of consciousness in the desperate hope that humanity could learn to fight fire with fire. As she talked, Jake listened with the intense focus of a man whose species depended on understanding every word. And when she finished explaining the risks and the impossibly small chances of success, Jake's response came without hesitation. "When do we start?" The medical bay aboard the Horizon had been transformed into something that looked more like a torture chamber than a place of healing. Dr. Lisa Park had spent 36 straight hours preparing for the most dangerous experiment in human history, converting surgical equipment into devices that could graft alien neural tissue onto a human brain while the patient remained conscious. The Kethver power core sat in the center of the room like a malevolent heart, connected to machines that Lisa had built from salvaged parts and desperate inspiration. Captain Jake Morrison lay strapped to the operating table, his head held immobile by a metal frame that Dr. Ray Johnson had welded together from spare parts. Electrodes covered Jake's skull like a crown of thorns, monitoring brain activity that would hopefully continue throughout the procedure. If the readings flatlined for more than 30 seconds, Lisa would have to assume that the experiment had killed him and try to salvage what they could from the failure. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Jake?" Lisa asked one final time, her hands shaking as she prepared the injection that would flood his nervous system with Kethvar neural enhancement compounds. "Once we start, there's no going back. Modifications will either work or they'll kill you, but they'll definitely change you into something that's never existed before." Jake's smile was steady despite the fear in his eyes. Doc, my species is about to go extinct in the next 18 hours, unless we find a miracle. I figure becoming the first human-alien hybrid is a pretty reasonable price to pay for a chance to save everyone I've ever cared about. The Kethver fleet had continued to accelerate beyond all previous estimates. Their ships moving through space with the terrible purpose of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Long-range sensors showed the enemy formation spreading out like a net, positioning themselves to catch any human ships that tried to escape the asteroid field. Admiral Kate Sullivan had ordered all civilian vessels to power down their engines and hide deep within the largest asteroids, hoping to buy a few more hours of life for the women and children who represented humanity's future. Lisa began the injection process, watching Jake's vital signs spike as alien compounds entered his bloodstream. The Kethver neural enhancers were unlike anything in human medicine, crystalline structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As they spread through Jake's nervous system, his brain activity began changing in ways that made Lisa's instruments scream warnings about impossible readings. Neural pathway formation is accelerating beyond all normal parameters, Ray reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Jake, can you hear me? How do you feel? Jake's response came through gritted teeth as waves of alien sensation washed through his consciousness. Like someone is rewiring my brain with lightning while showing me colors that don't have names. But I'm still here, Doc. Still human enough to be terrified out of my mind. The next phase of the procedure required direct grafting of Kethver neural tissue onto Jake's brain stem, creating biological connections between human and alien consciousness. Lisa worked with hands steadier than she had any right to expect, using surgical techniques that she was inventing on the spot while the fate of her species hung in the balance. The alien tissue seemed to move on its own, reaching out toward Jake's nervous system like it was eager to make the connection dot as the grafting process continued. Jake began experiencing visions that he struggled to describe. He spoke in whispers about seeing the universe from a perspective that human language couldn't capture, about perceiving layers of reality that existed beneath the matter and energy that defined normal existence. His descriptions made no sense to human ears, but Lisa recognized the mathematical concepts he was trying to express. Jake was beginning to perceive quantum substrate directly. The bones of the universe, Jake whispered, his voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. I can see the framework that holds everything together. It's like looking at the source code of reality itself. But the enhanced perception came with a terrible price. Jake's human nervous system wasn't designed to process the overwhelming flood of information that quantum substrate perception provided. His brain began overheating as it tried to handle sensory input that exceeded the capacity of human consciousness by orders of magnitude. Lisa watched his vital signs spike into dangerous territory, knowing that they were approaching the point where success and failure would be separated by margins too thin to measure. Neural cascade failure in Sector 7 through 12, Ray called out, his voice rising with panic. Lisa, we're losing him. His brain can't handle the data load. Jake's body went rigid on the operating table as his enhanced consciousness struggled to process information that no human mind had ever been designed to comprehend. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours, his vital signs flatlined completely. Lisa prepared to call the time of death, to add Jake's name to the long list of good people who had died trying to save humanity from extinction. Then Jake's eyes opened, and they were glowing with an inner light that made everyone in the room take a step backward. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate through dimensions that human ears couldn't normally perceive. I can see it all, Jake said, his words filled with a mixture of ecstasy and horror. The quantum substrate that creates everything we think of as real. And I can touch it, Lisa. I can manipulate the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. To demonstrate his newfound abilities, Jake focused his enhanced consciousness on a metal surgical instrument. Lying on the table next to him, the tool began to phase in and out of normal spacetime, becoming translucent and then solid again as Jake learned to control his access to quantum substrate. The display of power was small and precise, but it represented a breakthrough that changed everything humanity thought they knew about the nature of reality itself. Lisa quickly ran additional tests, confirming that Jake had gained the ability to perceive and manipulate quantum substrate through sheer force of enhanced consciousness. But she also discovered something that filled her with both hope and dread. Jake's human emotional responses seemed to amplify his substrate manipulation, abilities far beyond anything the HFY had ever achieved. Where the aliens approached quantum substrate with cold alien logic, Jake accessed it through human passion and determination, creating resonance effects that multiplied his power exponentially. The key isn't superior evolution, Lisa realized as she studied Jake's brain scans. It's emotional intensity. Human feelings create quantum substrate resonance patterns that alien logic can't match. We're not accessing their power the way they do. We're doing it better. Word of Jake's successful transformation spread quickly through the human fleet, carried by encrypted communications channels to every ship hiding in the asteroid field. The impossible had happened. Humanity had found a way to fight back against technology that had seemed as unstoppable as the laws of physics themselves. But Jake's enhanced abilities came with limitations that became apparent as he pushed his powers to their limits during testing sessions. Each use of quantum substrate manipulation left Jake physically and mentally drained, his hybrid nervous system struggling to handle forces that existed beyond normal human comprehension. He could phase objects through solid matter for brief periods, manipulate local gravity fields, and even create small distortions in spacetime itself. But the effort required to perform these feats left him exhausted and disoriented, his enhanced consciousness threatening to burn out from the strain. Engineer Susan Blake worked with Jake to develop practical applications for his abilities, converting his quantum substrate manipulation into weapons and defenses that could be used against the approaching HFY fleet. Together, they discovered that Jake could disrupt alien technology by attacking the substrate connections that allowed it to function, essentially turning the HFY's own power source against them. But more importantly, Jake began teaching other humans to access quantum substrate using modified meditation techniques and emotional focusing exercises that he developed through trial and error. While none of the other volunteers achieved his level of ability, dozens of humans managed to gain basic quantum substrate perception. Captain Amy Foster learned to phase small objects through solid matter. Pilot Danny Wright discovered he could briefly accelerate his personal time stream. Medic Carol Davis found she could manipulate molecular bonds to accelerate healing processes. As the HFY fleet entered the outer edge of the asteroid field, humanity prepared for a battle unlike anything the universe had ever seen. They would fight not with conventional weapons or superior technology, but with the raw emotional power of a species that refused to accept extinction. Jake stood on the bridge of his converted mining vessel, his glowing eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed enemy ships moving through space like harbingers of death. The aliens expected to face primitive human technology and desperate resistance that would crumble within hours. Instead, they were about to encounter something that their million years of evolution hadn't prepared them for. They were about to learn what happened when humanity discovered that the universe had rules that could be rewritten by those brave enough or die. The HFY dreadnought Infinite Darkness moved through the asteroid field like death incarnate, its hull flickering between dimensions as it phased through solid rock without slowing its terrible advance. Behind it, 70 smaller ships spread out in a formation designed to catch and destroy every human vessel hiding in the cold stone maze. The alien commander felt nothing but contempt for the primitive species that had managed to survive this long through luck and cowardice. The extermination of humanity would be completed within hours, adding another extinct race to the long list of species that had challenged Kethver dominance and lost. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his converted mining vessel, feeling the alien neural modifications burning through his enhanced consciousness like fire. His glowing eyes tracked the enemy fleet's movement on tactical displays, while his new quantum substrate perception showed him the deeper reality underneath normal spacetime. The Kethver ships appeared on his enhanced senses as bright knots of manipulated fundamental forces, their technology creating distortions in the fabric of existence itself. All human ships, this is Morrison. Jake broadcast on the encrypted channel that connected the scattered remnants of his species. Remember what we learned in the simulations. Don't try to fight their ships directly. Attack the substrate connections that allow their technology to function. Think about everyone you've lost, everyone you're trying to protect, and use that emotion to amplify your abilities. The first contact came when a Kethver destroyer detected the converted cargo hauler, New Hope, hiding in the shadow of a kilometer-wide asteroid. The alien ship powered up its reality-tearing weapons, preparing to vaporize the human vessel and the 3,000 civilians it carried. But before the destroyer could fire, Jake reached out with his enhanced consciousness and grabbed hold of the quantum substrate threads that powered the aliens' weapon systems. What happened next defied every law of physics that the Kethver understood. Instead of the cold, logical substrate manipulation that their species had perfected over millions of years, Jake attacked their technology with raw human emotion, amplified by quantum resonance. His rage at seeing his home world destroyed, his desperate love for the survivors he was trying to protect, and his absolute refusal to let humanity die quietly combined into a focused assault on the fundamental forces that held the enemy ship together. The Kethvar destroyer simply came apart, not destroyed by conventional weapons or torn apart by gravitational stress, but literally dissolved as the quantum substrate bonds holding its matter together were disrupted by emotional forces that the aliens had never encountered before. Ship's hull flickered once, and then scattered into component atoms that drifted away like glowing dust. Across the human fleet, other enhanced survivors began their own attacks on the alien vessels. Captain Amy Foster used her limited substrate abilities to phase a mining charge directly through a Kethver cruiser's shields, detonating it inside the enemy ship's power core. Pilot Danny Wright accelerated his perception of time and slipped his tiny fighter through a gap in spacetime itself, appearing behind an alien destroyer to deliver a conventional missile strike that should have been impossible to achieve. The effort was killing them. Jake felt his hybrid nervous system beginning to burn out from the strain of channeling forces that human consciousness wasn't designed to handle. Each substrate manipulation left him weaker, his enhanced brain struggling to process information from dimensions that existed beyond normal reality. He had perhaps one major attack left before the alien modifications would consume his sanity completely. The Kethver Fleet Command couldn't understand what they were witnessing. Their ships were being destroyed by attacks that made no sense according to everything they knew about quantum substrate manipulation. The primitive humans were accessing fundamental forces through methods that their own scientists would have dismissed as impossible. Emotion and determination were somehow creating substrate resonance effects that exceeded anything in their vast technological databases. Engineer Susan Blake coordinated the human counterattack from her position aboard the mining ship Persistence, converting the vessel's industrial equipment into weapons that attacked reality itself rather than the physical ships of their enemies. Her crew had learned to channel their desperation and fear into quantum substrate disruption fields, turning their cargo hauler into a weapon that could tear holes in spacetime. "Jake, the big one is coming for us," Susan reported over the communication channel. her voice tight with strain as she maintained the substrate field that was keeping her ship phased partially out of normal reality. The dreadnought is heading straight for our position, and it's not slowing down. The infinite darkness cut through the asteroid field like a sword through paper, its massive hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been penetrated by any known force. The Kethver commander had decided to end this impossible battle by destroying the human ship that seemed to be coordinating the resistance. Once their leader was eliminated, the remaining human vessels would fall quickly. Jake watched the alien dreadnought approach on his tactical display, feeling the weight of 10,000 human lives pressing down on his burning consciousness. His enhanced senses could perceive the vast quantum substrate matrix that powered the enemy ship, a web of fundamental forces so complex and well defended that attacking it directly would be like trying to stop an avalanche with bare hands. But as he studied the alien vessel's substrate signature, Jake began to see something that made his hybrid heart race with desperate hope. The Kethver had built their dreadnought to be invincible according to their understanding of quantum substrate manipulation. But their understanding was limited by millions of years of cold, logical evolution. They had never encountered a species that approached fundamental forces through emotional intensity, had never imagined that consciousness could amplify substrate resonance through sheer force of will and determination. All enhanced humans, link with me. Jake broadcast to the 43 other survivors who had gained quantum substrate abilities. We're going to try something that's either going to save humanity or kill us all in the attempt. One by one, the enhanced humans reached out through quantum substrate dimensions, their consciousness connecting across impossible distances to form a network of human will and emotion. Jake felt their minds joining with his, their combined determination creating resonance patterns in the fundamental fabric of reality itself. Captain Amy Foster's desperate love for her daughter. Pilot Danny Wright's rage at the destruction of his home colony. Medic Carol Davis's absolute refusal to let another patient die under her care. Together, the linked human consciousness reached into quantum substrate with emotional power that no Kethver could have imagined possible. They didn't attack the alien dreadnought's hull or weapons or shields. Instead, they attacked the fundamental forces that allowed the ship to exist, reaching into the quantum substrate foundation of reality itself and setting it on fire with human passion and determination. The results were visible from light years away. Space around the infinite darkness began to burn with impossible flames as quantum substrate ignited under the combined assault of 44 human minds linked by desperation and love. The fabric of reality itself caught fire, creating wounds. An existence that leaked energy from dimensions that had no names, the Kethver dreadnought didn't explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist as the fundamental forces holding its matter together were disrupted by emotional resonance patterns that exceeded every limit in their scientific understanding. Where the massive ship had been, only empty space remained, marked by aurora-like patterns in quantum substrate that would persist for thousands of years as permanent scars in the structure of reality itself. The remaining Kethver fleet, witnessing the impossible destruction of their most powerful vessel, began to retreat from the asteroid field in formations that spoke of barely controlled panic. Their weapons couldn't lock onto targets that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Their shields offered no protection against attacks that came from dimensions they couldn't perceive. For the first time in their species' history, the Kethvar were facing an enemy that fought with rules they didn't understand, but victory came with a terrible price. Jake felt his enhanced consciousness beginning to dissolve as the strain of channeling fundamental forces burned through his hybrid nervous system like acid through paper. Around the human fleet, other enhanced survivors collapsed as their modified brains paid the ultimate cost for accessing power that no human mind was designed to handle. As Jake slipped toward unconsciousness, he managed one final broadcast to the retreating alien fleet, his words carrying across quantum substrate dimensions to reach every Kethvar ship in the galaxy. "We are humanity," he said, his voice echoing through layers of reality that existed beyond normal perception. "We are the species that refuses to die quietly. Remember our name, because the next time you threaten what we love, we'll set the entire universe on fire to stop you." The battle was over, but the war for humanity's survival had just begun. In proving that they could fight back against impossible odds, humanity. Captain Jake Morrison lay dying in Dr. Lisa Park's arms as the enhanced neural modifications that had saved humanity burned through his consciousness like white-hot wire. His hybrid nervous system was collapsing under the strain of channeling forces that existed beyond the normal limits of human comprehension, each breath coming harder as his brain struggled to maintain basic life functions. Around them, the medical bay of the horizon hummed with emergency equipment that could do nothing to stop the price that quantum substrate manipulation demanded from human flesh. Was it worth it? Jake whispered, his glowing eyes already beginning to dim as the alien modifications consumed the last of his strength. Through the viewport, he could see the retreating Kethvar fleet, their once invincible ships fleeing from an enemy they no longer understood or could predict. Lisa held Jake's hand and felt the strange warmth that came from neural tissue existing partially outside normal reality. "Jake, you saved us all. 10,000 people are alive because of what you did. Your species has a future because you were willing to become something that had never existed before." Across the human fleet, other enhanced survivors were paying the same terrible price for their victory. Captain Amy Foster died aboard the New Hope, her last words a whispered message to the daughter she would never see grow up. Pilot Danny writes, "Fighter drifted powerless through the asteroid field as his enhanced consciousness burned out in brilliant flashes of quantum light. Of the 44 humans who had linked their minds to attack the Kethvar dreadnought, only 7 survived the aftermath, and even they bore permanent damage from channeling forces that human nervous systems weren't designed to handle. But their sacrifice had changed everything. The retreating Kethvar fleet carried with them the terrifying knowledge that humanity possessed weapons that could attack the fundamental structure of reality itself. The aliens' million-year dominance over the galaxy had been shattered in a single battle by a species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. Emergency transmissions flashed between Kethvar worlds as their leaders struggled to understand how humans had gained access to quantum substrate manipulation that exceeded their own capabilities. The Kethvar war mind that had commanded the attack fleet sent a final message before its damaged flagship jumped into hyperspace, broadcasting on frequencies that reached every corner of known space. The message was simple and carried the weight of a species' first encounter with genuine fear. Humanity is to be avoided at all costs. Their world systems are declared forbidden zones. Any ship that enters human space does so without support or hope of rescue. Dr. Ray Johnson worked frantically to save the surviving enhanced humans, using medical knowledge gained from months of studying Kethvar neural technology. He developed treatments that could stabilize the hybrid modifications without completely burning out human consciousness, creating a new field of medicine that balanced human biology with alien enhancement. The work was dangerous and experimental, but it offered hope that future generations might access quantum substrate abilities without paying the ultimate price. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the aftermath of humanity's impossible victory, organizing rescue operations for the survivors and beginning the long process of rebuilding their scattered civilization. The human fleet had been reduced to fewer than 8,000 souls, but they were 8,000 people who now carried within them the knowledge that they could reshape reality itself when cornered by extinction. Engineer Susan Blake led teams through the wreckage of destroyed Kethver ships, salvaging alien technology that could be studied and adapted for human use. But more importantly, she began developing new methods for accessing quantum substrate that didn't require dangerous neural modifications. Working with Lisa's research, she created meditation techniques and emotional focusing exercises that allowed humans to touch the fundamental forces of reality without risking their sanity. The children born in the aftermath of the battle grew up learning abilities that their parents could barely comprehend. In makeshift schools aboard the surviving ships, young humans practiced phasing objects through solid matter and manipulating local gravity fields, as naturally as previous generations had learned to read and write. Their young minds adapted to quantum substrate perception with an ease that amazed their elders, suggesting that humanity's evolutionary path had been permanently altered by their contact with Kethfor technology. Lisa stood in her laboratory 5 years after the battle, watching a group of 10-year-old students practice quantum substrate manipulation under careful supervision. The children could phase small objects between dimensions, accelerate their personal time streams, and even create tiny rifts in space-time itself. What had nearly killed the first generation of enhanced humans came as naturally to these children as walking or breathing. "Dr. Park, why don't the Kethver ever come back?" asked a young girl named Mary, her eyes glowing faintly with the quantum resonance that marked the new generation of humanity. "Are they afraid of us?" Lisa smiled as she watched the aurora-like patterns that still flickered in the quantum substrate. Around their solar system, permanent scars where human emotion had once set reality itself on fire. They learned something important about humanity, Mary. They learned that some species become more dangerous when they're threatened, not less dangerous. They discovered that we carry within us the power to rewrite the rules of existence itself when everything we love is at stake. The human fleet had grown from 8,000 survivors to nearly 50,000 as new colonies were established and children were born, who would never know a universe where humanity was helpless before alien technology. They built their ships differently now, incorporating quantum substrate manipulation into every system and creating vessels that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Their weapons could attack reality itself, and their defenses could phase entire cities out of normal dimensions when threatened. But more importantly, humanity had gained something that no other species in the galaxy possessed. They had proven to themselves and to the universe that there were no limits that couldn't be broken by sufficient determination and emotional intensity. The knowledge that they could literally set the sky on fire when cornered had transformed them from a species, fleeing extinction into a force that other civilizations approached with careful respect. Jake Morrison's sacrifice lived on in the quantum substrate itself, his final act of defiance creating permanent changes in the fundamental structure of reality around human space. Ships that entered the solar system could feel the presence of something vast and protective, a consciousness that had burned itself into the fabric of existence to ensure that humanity would never again face extinction alone. 10 years after the battle, human exploration ships began venturing beyond their home system for the first time since the Kethvar invasion. They found a galaxy changed by the knowledge of what humanity could do when pushed to the brink of extinction. Ancient civilizations that had never acknowledged human existence sent diplomatic messages expressing cautious friendship. Species that had once viewed humans as primitive curiosities now offered trade, agreements, and military alliances. The universe had learned to respect humanity not because of their technology or their wisdom, but because of their absolute refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was the only logical option. They had become known as the species that could crack the sky open with fire when everything they loved was threatened. And that reputation preceded them wherever human ships traveled. In the end, Jake Morrison's question had been answered. It was worth it. Humanity survived, grew stronger, and claimed their place among the stars, not as conquerors or diplomats, but as the species that had proven that emotion and determination could reshape reality itself. They were the people who had looked into the face of extinction and decided to set the universe on fire rather than go quietly into the dark dot and in the quantum substrate that surrounded their worlds. Patterns of light still danced like aurora in an eternal sky, reminding anyone brave enough to look that humanity had once cracked heaven itself open with fire and found that they were strong enough to hold the pieces. Together with their bare hands,